I think there are countless scenarios where the industry can be more efficient because we need to do more with less. I mean, people are stretched to the max. And I think people get a little defensive when they hear, oh, AI can do BD work, or AI can help with legal work, or AI can help with whatever estimating or superintendent work. And the people who hear that, they instantly get really defensive and they kind of dig in. They're like, you can't replace me. I'm irreplaceable. AI, boo.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Future of Construction. Today I'm speaking with Phil Thoden, president of the AGC Austin chapter. Phil, thanks so much for chatting with me today.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah.
It's a great studio. I've never done a podcast in a big studio.
Well, I gotta say, I should have checked height requirements because you had to duck when you got in here.
Well, as I said, I lived in Washington, D.C., where the home that we had was a 1920s row house built for people who were your height, frankly. So I'm really good at ducking.
Well, hey, tell me about how I know you and I have known each other now for a couple of months, and I've questioned you many times on your history and how you got into construction, but I would love for you to tell the audience how you got into construction.
Yeah. So I started my career in Washington, D.C. I graduated from college there, liberal arts guy. I started working in politics. I fell into an opportunity to work on Capitol Hill for an elected official. And I was really nervous because I wasn't really into politics growing up. Like I kind of, I knew about Washington, D.C., but I wasn't like a hardcore, I wasn't in the college Republicans or the college Democrats or anything like that. But I fell into this job. I was really nervous about it. But what I realized was that politics is all about people. And I wasn't really into any particular policy matter, like foreign policy or economic policy. But what I loved about my almost 5 years in that job was that ordinary people came to that office either by phone, regular mail, before email, or in person, and they would tell you their story.
Yeah.
And here I am, like 21, 22, and people running companies that I was familiar with when I had lived in that state, like the CEO's there, and I'm sitting in on this meeting with him and the senator. It was just so fascinating. But concerned citizens, like Quakers, I remember them coming up when a war started. They had driven all night because they were so passionate about peace. And so as a young person, I got to see how a community comes together and hear all these stories. And I realized that's what I really, really like. Now, I had to make some money, so I moved over to the trade association world. And I eventually found myself working for the AGC of America. But even before I started there, a friend of mine worked there. And he invited me to an event that they were having in Washington, D.C. And I remember being in the room, and I remember how I felt because the people were successful looking people. They were very friendly, very engaging, very professional, and very warm and inclusive. And I just thought to myself, wow, these people, they're in all 50 states, they're building their communities. I just really enjoyed talking to them. And then I wound up working at the AGC of America. I actually handled tax and fiscal affairs issues, which is kind of a joke because that's not my background. But when you work in a trade association, just like I do now, you don't have to be an expert, but you need to know experts. And so I had all these experts who were CFOs and controllers and accountants. They could talk the talk with other people who were trying to change things in the tax and accounting world for construction. And my job was just to kind of connect them and then give a short synopsis of what the issue was for other people in legislative offices. When you work in a legislative office, again, you're dealing with all these different issues. So I really, really loved the AGC of America family. I got tired of Washington, D.C., and so my wife and I sold our house. I had 2 kids, a wife, and no job. And we moved to Austin, Texas in 2003. It was March of 2003. And unemployment, if you've ever been unemployed, if you know the end game, it's really great because if you know everything's going to be okay, you have all this time. You can just go do whatever and relax and know
that's called fun employment. Yeah.
Fun employment. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But when you don't know the end game, every waking moment, even your dreams at night are filled with anxiety, right? And I remember my family was up near Dallas. I was coming down here a lot. I really didn't know anybody in Texas. I was just kind of like going and talking to people, and I get referred to people. But one thing I learned was that everybody has been in like a difficult situation like that's kept them up at night. And it was really reassuring. These people who you see have achieved a level of success and they open up and like being unemployed, I get to go and talk with people who ordinarily wouldn't how the time of day for me, but turned out to be a good experience. So anyways, about 4 months of this going on, we're thinking maybe we should move back to Washington, D.C. I get a phone call out of the blue from AGC of America, and they said, hey, the person who runs this Austin AGC building chapter just announced that he's going to leave, and you would be great for that position. I mean, it was like a mini miracle, frankly, Chloe. And I just felt really confident that I was going to get the job. And I interviewed people who interviewed me. They're still around. And I've been doing that for 21 years now. I've been with the Austin AGC. And I still don't consider myself like a construction expert, but as an association professional, you're a cat herder. And I get to deal with, construction technology people like you. I get to deal with people who are interested in law or accounting, parts of construction, all the different facets. I really, really enjoy it because ultimately construction is about building our quality of life here in our community. And the people, by and large, it's still kind of like a family business mentality. So when I've gotten involved with the Agency of America or our state group, I've been able to bring my family along. And that's not only encouraged, it's expected. And I think there are very few industries I've learned where that is normalized.
Why do you think that is?
I think because there's so many generational transitions. I mean, I think 70-80% of construction companies are family owned or closely held. And so the dad wants to introduce, the next generation. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I've heard incredible stories of, I had to fire my uncle because of, whatever he was doing wrong. And then, then we had our family Christmas party. They say you can have a family or you can have a business, but having a family business is like really, really difficult. Yeah, I've just really met great people. And I think to succeed in construction, you have to be able to operate at all these different levels. You have to know like the developer crowd, the owner crowd, the finance people, the legal crowd, the trades people. You want to know who's in your office, who's the most junior person, maybe the new person who's interning or sweeping the street,
Why does that help you succeed?
Because you need to have those interpersonal skills to, I think, get buy-in from those people. In 1 minute, you're, talking about bonding and finance stuff, or you're talking to an owner. And in the private building world, all the owners are a little bit different. Like in the highway world, you're just dealing with the Department of Transportation. Mm-hmm. So that's one way of presenting yourself. But when you talk to building contractors, they may be working for a hospital that has a certain set of values. They may then work for a tech company that has a certain way of wanting to work. You might work with a church or whatever. So I think those people skills really come in handy for you to operate at the highest level of success in construction. Obviously, the first thing you need to do to be successful in construction is to be, a quiet doer, I guess. You need to get projects done or assemble a team of people who can get the projects done. But I've just seen those people skills really work wonders with the companies that I've dealt with, whether here in Austin or nationally. I just rolled off the National Agency Board of Directors, got to interact with people from amazing companies doing amazing things all across the globe.
Which is a pretty incredible journey that you've been on in terms of, where you started with the AGC and dealing with taxes and finances, and then coming to Austin and having this kind of 21 years of being the head of this chapter. I mean, how has construction evolved in your 21 years here?
In a lot of ways. I would just say, though, that somebody gave me some really good advice early on, and I use this all the time. And I think you probably follow this as well, which is that sometimes you don't know where your feet are going to land, but you know that you're taking a step in the right direction. And I really encourage people to follow that. So, but here in Austin, gosh, when I came from Washington, D.C. to Austin, it was like going from overdrive to first gear even. Because, up in D.C., I mean, it's all suit and tied. It's busy, busy, busy. It's a global capital. All the construction people I met who came to the AGC of America offices, they were usually at the executive level, so they would have suits on. And I come to Austin, and our main service at the time was a plan room. So like before the internet, hard to believe, but I remember it, like dinosaurs and before the internet, we had a plan room. And so if you wanted to bid on jobs, you could either go to the owner and buy a set of plans or print out a set of plans, very expensive, or you could belong to an organization like the AGC that has a plan room. And you could show up at 7:30 or have your estimator show up at 7:30 and look at the set of plans and then get your bids together and have a cup of coffee and kind of network with people at the Austin AGC. So, all of a sudden there are people who have mud on their boots and real folksy, pulling up in their pickup truck. It was like, wow, I don't need to wear a suit and tie anymore. This is really great.
Yeah, that would have been a shock. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually was wearing a tie.
I was going to ask.
I'm kind of embarrassed by it now. When I see people in Austin wearing a tie, I'm like,
what are you doing?
Yeah, are you being arraigned today and you want to look sharp or something, or sentencing, or maybe you work for Enterprise, rent a car, because they always wear a suit and tie.
So you show up, you're wearing suit and tie, people are walking in, mud on their boots.
Yeah, I tell you, I was like, I don't know that this is for me. That was my initial thinking. I was like, this is a really great step, but it was just so slow. But it was a good time for me, Chloe, because I had 2 young children. I had a 3-year-old and a newborn at the time. And then Kate, my youngest, she came around in 2005. And so I think, I don't want to get preachy or anything, but I almost feel like, maybe there is a spiritual guide or some guardian angel that
watching over you.
Yeah. So, I did have a lot more time available. I'll never forget one time, I started work in July. I don't know, this is like October or something like that. And I get home from work and I play with the kids out back and we have dinner and, read to them, bath time, that whole thing. I go downstairs, I watch a little TV, and I haven't looked at the clock, and I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, it's got to be like 10 o'clock or something. I think it was like 8:15. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Like when I lived in Washington, D.C., we would get home at 7:30, 7:45, and sit down for dinner at 8:15. And I couldn't believe how much time suddenly I had here in Austin. And so I had time for hobbies like reading or just personal time, just to, But that was Austin in 2003. Now, somewhere along the way, Austin became this massively shiny object. And so like the winds have been blowing behind my back for, I think, the success of the organization, because people keep coming here. It's like 100 people a day or whatever keep coming to the Austin.
You remember that shift that kind of blew the winds this way?
Good question. I think the seeds were sown in the 20th century, late 20th century, when Semitech was established here. So there were a lot of tech companies that were like a little consortium formed here. And then Dell Computers was started. There was also an entity called Opportunity Austin, which we supported, which were civic leaders talking to companies about relocating to Austin. And I think a variety of things happened. There was the financial fallout of 2008, and a lot of construction companies and local economies really suffered. Austin suffered a little bit, but came out of that. I think people were looking for a variety of things. One, a lower cost of living, the better quality of life, like I've just shared with you. And then there were things like Formula One came here. So like all of a sudden, ooh, what's Austin all about? And there's always been that kind of cool factor with the Austin City Limits TV show and the Austin City Limits Music Festival. There were some chefs who got world renowned for what they're doing. And I think it wasn't like a singular event that I can think of, but all those changes happened. So around about 2011, 2012, things really took off. Our budget as an organization is dependent on the local construction economy. And it used to always be like 3 or 4 years up, 3 or 4 years down. It was like a slow roller coaster ride.
Yeah.
But then starting in about 2012 or 13, I'll have to look at all my graphs, but it's just been like a
steady climb.
Yeah, like even during COVID, some communities completely slowed down, but people just keep coming, and I like the vibe here. It's very laid back. You've spent time here. Hopefully lots more. There's a lot of energy, but it's not like New York energy that kind of overwhelms and might suffocate. It's just a laid back, good energy with a lot of good opportunities and a good quality of life.
And you talked about some of the tech scene coming on board and tech companies starting here and starting to make this a hub. Has that infiltrated kind of construction at all?
Mm-hmm.
How have those two streams crossed, or those industries crossed?
Yeah. So first of all, I will say that as Austin has grown and the projects have become larger, the biggest change among construction companies is that when I started here 21 years ago, I would say 75, 80% of the construction companies were small family-owned companies. Like, I'm Phil Thoden, and with PT Construction, my name's on the truck, and I'm very personally vested in the industry. As Austin has grown, I would say that today, 75, 80% of the firms doing construction, either as GCs or specialty contractors, are regional or national firms, right? The projects have gotten bigger, and there's been consolidation in the industry and so forth. So that being said, we do have some technology leaders here. Procore has a big office, and matter of fact, one of the old bank buildings, think of like a stodgy kind of never changing industry. You think of banks, it used to be the Chase Tower. Now it's the Procore building or tower, whatever the wording is. But they have a big presence here. Who else? Document Crunch, they have a new office here. Just a variety of innovators. You've been spending time here. I think those companies that are larger, they have the staffing and the resources to be able to vet and decide which technologies in construction to implement. But that's like the top, 10, 20% of companies out there. So they are pushing the envelope with construction technology. But the challenge is that, 80% of the industry or so, they're just busy doing construction. They don't have like a full team, or, in one of their company's national offices elsewhere, you might have like 4 or 5 people who just do all the construction technology vetting. A lot of people are just like, Phil, we don't have time for that. We're putting out fires. We're chasing the next project. And we still send paper checks,
We still receive paper checks.
But you know what? We haven't never had an accounts payable person wire, $1 million off to Petersburg, Russia or whatever. So technology it's rapidly changing at a very rapid pace. And I think companies are kind of overwhelmed by that. And I'll share with you the big technology change when I first started was, again, the plan room, that physical plan room. And then the internet came around, and these companies like iSquareFoot, who we partnered with, they realized that they can harvest plan information from owners and make it available on their internet platform that you can access from wherever you are. And there was a lot of kerfluffle, or just like a lot of heartburn on the part of some companies saying like, we don't need this internet technology. We're going to do things the old way.
Where do you think that stemmed from?
People don't like change, right?
Were there early adopters in that situation? Like,
Yeah.
and what was their motivation when they saw that technology? Like, why them and not everybody else?
Yeah. So some people just gravitate towards doing something new, but then others read the writing on the wall. And what was happening was that subcontractors were saying, hey, we're not going to bid your work if you are requiring us to do paper stuff, or if a lot of people didn't want to pay, I'm going to say it was like, I don't know, $2,500 or whatever to subscribe to iSquareFoot and use their platform. There were some fees associated with that. And so some people were like, we can just PDF our plans and we'll house them on our website. And the subs were like, your stuff's terrible. It's not indexed. I don't know where my CSI code stuff is, et cetera. So we're not going to do business with you. And companies decided at that point, like, okay, we better get on board or we're going to get left behind.
Interesting.
And I remember, I think it was 2004 or 2005, visiting with a subcontractor in his office, and he was an older gentleman, and he's real folksy. And he said, yeah, we just got this iSquareFoot that y'all are partnering with them on. And he said, it's either his son or his grandson, just graduated from college, and he sits in his cubicle, and I don't know what he does on the computer all day long, but we are bidding and winning more work than ever. That always stuck out. So I think that's probably what happens today, right? People get stuck on their ways, but I think the pace of technology change is just so overwhelming because, we did a webinar with Mercator.ai and you, and we just did one with Permit Flow this week. We did one on cybersecurity about a month or so ago. I'm trying to set up like a series of, I call construction tech talks, but you would think they would get a lot more participation. I think we had 11 yesterday, and I think
we had about
2 dozen,
30, 40, I think showed up. Yeah.
You would think there would be more, but I think people are just overwhelmed. Again, that 75 to 80% part of the construction industry that doesn't have the full-time tech people, they're like, yeah, that's really interesting. I have found consistently over the 21 years that we've been pumping out education and webinars and whatnot and speakers, that if you are a speaker representing an owner who has millions of dollars to spend and maybe spend on you, subcontractor or supplier, people drop whatever they're doing and they're going to be there. On the back end of the construction process, if you've done your work, and you're not getting paid and you want advice from a lawyer, when we do like a lien law seminar or, how to get paid, and we'll bring in some high-powered lawyers, people drop everything. So when it's about the money flow in or getting it on the back end, people drop everything. Everything else is just sort of like, that's nice to know, but I'm so busy. I'm a lifelong learner, so I always enjoy, listening to what's new and what's the latest out there. But again, a lot of people are just too busy doing construction. So that is a challenge. And I'm trying to wrap my head around how can we as an organization, deliver to that large underserved population of companies that aren't currently taking full advantage of solutions that are out there.
What do you think it would change for them to take, not what did they need to change, but what would it look like if this industry was more, I guess, open to adopting a lot more of this technology? Like how would it look in your mind?
Well, I think, people would do more with less ultimately. It takes an owner to maybe prescribe things. Like I know in Denver, Textura was a financial payment system that was very transparent. And this was about 12 or so years ago. And smaller contractors, particularly minority contractor firms that the local government wanted to encourage to succeed, they were saying, hey, we're not getting paid and we don't know where our money is. And, the owner is saying, well, we paid the GC, so it's somewhere between us and you in the GC.
Shoot.
So Textura was brought on board as a solution that the city adopted. And I don't know if they officially required it in their contracts, but anyways, it became adopted widely. So when you have an owner that requires that kind of transparency, that was one way around it. The other way, like the plan room situation, it was just sort of like everybody was on that train. And we used to have a plan room. We wound it down, I think in 2011. I'm not kidding you. The last person to come to our plan room, he would be there as this old guy. I don't even think he had a cell phone. I used to joke with him that I was going to have to issue him I think it's a 1099 or whatever, like if you're an employee, whatever that tax document it is, because he was always around. And he was the owner of a really small company. And then he wasn't there for about 2 weeks. We're like, oh, did he go fishing or, is he traveling? Open up the paper and there's his obituary. So literally like the last dinosaur of that physical plan room, he passed away. And then we were able to shut down that plan room and turn it into the education training room that we use a lot. I don't know, Chloe. Again, there's so much out there. There's so many solutions. Where do you begin? And meanwhile, you wake up with only a limited amount of hours to deal with all the components of a construction project and then chase down new work as well. So it doesn't leave a whole lot of time for adopting different technologies. But I think it's always been this way, that there's always like 5 to 10% of the industry is always on the cutting edge, like they're early adopters, and then everybody else comes in behind. Like, when the first, iPhone came around, not everybody immediately got one of those. But once everybody saw, all the laggards saw how great it was and prices came down, they jumped on board. I mean, I remember technology, like something as simple as an iPhone. Like I remember when those didn't exist. And I remember we were doing a renovation project on our building and there was some issue, I forget what it was, but the superintendent, I was like, oh, do you need to go, talk to the designer or go back to the office? He's like, no, I have this iPhone. I'm just going to take a couple of pictures and send a text and I'll get an answer in like a minute on this problem. I was like, I mean, as stupid as it sounds, like today in 2024, in like 2009 or whatever that was, 10.
That was shocking.
Like, oh my gosh, what is this, this sorcery that you're putting in place? But I mean, gosh, think about all the information that is shared now in the digital world that, had to be passed around in the physical world. And I think that's where my interests have been. Again, I'm not on the front lines of building a building or estimating it or litigating the project. But I do get a lot of inquiries from our members. We have 275 construction company members, more or less, here in Austin. And I often get calls from people saying, hey, I saw this project. It looks like it's about ready to kick off construction fencing. Do you know who the GC is or the owner and what that is going to be? So I would go and dig. Either I knew it in my head or I'd dig through the city permitting portal, which was really clunky, still is. And a time waster. And sometimes I would find what I was looking for, but more often I would find frustration.
Yeah.
Right. So I began thinking about, hey, I read an article about open data probably 7 or 8 years ago and how cities were turning over this information to the public to take a look at, I don't know, emergency services or power uses or whatever data they had, including permitting data, and go for it, public, and let us know what you're finding out. And I was reading about this one guy up in Seattle who was using data to create a little map of buildings being built in Seattle. And I was like, gosh, that would be so neat if we could do that here in Austin. So I started talking to people and figured it was pretty simple because you can download all the permitting data into an Excel spreadsheet. There's latitude and longitude. Once I saw that, I was like, okay, you should be able to, find like an 8th grade kid who knows how to code and just layer that data over a map of Austin. But I got ghosted by a lot of like developers. I would be somewhere and tell them, and they'd look at me like you are, like, oh yeah, I can work on that. And then, I'd be like, hey, Chloe, can you, like crickets. But it wasn't until COVID and this guy calls me via LinkedIn, which I love LinkedIn. And he's like, hey, I see you know a lot about construction in Austin. I have this app that I'm working on. Would you mind taking a look at it? It's a construction industry app. And I said, yes, one condition. You have to hear me out. If you can do this app, I have an app. And he was kind of hurting, I think, for money at that point because his main business relied on restaurants and bars and patrons there, and that wasn't happening. So he got back to me the next day and he said, I can put this together for you. That was in 2020. Knowing what I know now, I could probably do it myself, but I didn't know at the time. He did a very good job for us and it was a very reasonable expense, and it became the Build It Permits app. And we rolled it out in September of 22. Not much fanfare. We're a small budget trade association. I don't have a full-time marketing staff and whatnot. And it was just sort of like a little fun side project to see, okay, what can we do, AGC, in the construction technology space that would be really, really helpful? And is it going to work? And what I was finding was that people really, really liked it, but they wanted it even at a higher level. And I wanted it at a higher level. Mm-hmm. But, we didn't have the resources to put a lot of money into it. We're not a technology organization. But I was trying to think of how do we monetize this and how do we take it to the next level? That was in March of this year. I went to a conference about AI, and it was all about like data, to your point about all this information and how can it be harnessed and how can it impact the industry. And there's so much stuff that it's in all of our heads or it's like sitting in files somewhere. And if you can tap into that and make it, I think I've heard you use the terminology, make it intelligible and actionable, that's a real game changer. And so I was thinking about all that, and then you came in the door and you were telling me about your Mercator.ai. And like within 5 minutes, I was like, oh my gosh, another happy wanderer on this path that I've been walking alone. But, you have a technology background and you have the funding and the smarts that I lack in this regard. I'm really excited about, what we're doing together. But I think there are countless scenarios where the industry can be more efficient because we need to do more with less. I mean, people are stretched to the max. And I think people get a little defensive when they hear, oh, AI can do BD work, or AI can help with legal work, or AI can help with whatever estimating or superintendent work. And the people who hear that, they instantly get really defensive and they kind of dig in. They're like, you can't replace me. I'm irreplaceable, AI, boo. But
I want to ask you a question about that, because in my early research in building Mercator and talking to folks, that I felt that viscerally. Mm-hmm. I mean, I grew up in a construction family. Like my dad is literally an engineer as like part of his, like who he is as a character and how he relates to himself. And that's something that like I know when he retires eventually, I mean, he's in mid-60s now. When he retires, like that will be something of a loss in very similar way to how in agriculture, like you see parents working on the farm until they're into their 80s and 90s because it is literally part of how they relate to themselves.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious about that relationship, because it presents such a wall sometimes between, I guess, the individual and adopting construction, and just that mental shift of, yes, we all don't like change. I'm the CEO of a construction tech company. I don't like change sometimes, you know?
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, where does that come from? Where is that kind of, I don't want to be replaced, or I'm being almost, assaulted to who I am at the core when this new technology comes in?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think on a really deep philosophical level, my belief is that like change reminds people of the passing of time and their ultimate demise. And I think like at a very fundamental, like non-conscious kind of thinking process, like that's that like, you can't change this. Like, what, you're going to tear that building down? No. You're going to take Coach's house down? I mean, Coach hasn't lived there in 30 years, but it's still always Coach's house, for people that live there a long time. So I think that's part of it. But now the other part is people's identity is so consumed with what they do, and they're proud of what they do and how they do it. And to suggest that there's, technology that's going to do that, are you kidding me? Here's a scenario that I saw play out. I remember in 2021, I think it was September of 21, I was at the AGC of America convention, and I was at the hotel bar. I was waiting for a law firm to pick us up and take us to a nice dinner, right? Got down to the bar a little bit earlier so I could just, yap with some people. And I have a lawyer to my right from Austin. And then this guy, Josh Levy, shows up with some of his document crunch people. And Josh was like, yeah, we're using technology to revolutionize, legal, construction law. And this lawyer, as you can imagine, has an opinion, and a strong one, and she's very articulate. And I'm kind of like, watching the crossfire, and I'm like, whoa, because is the bus here? I need to get out of here. But I remember Josh saying like, yeah, this is going to be really great. And the lawyer was, from what I observed, very defensive about it. Fast forward to today, and I think most lawyers, I was talking we were at a recent AGC awards event, and I was talking to some lawyers about this whole scenario, and they all agreed that the best use of our mental capital should be on more challenging issues rather than just basic contract review. Yes. So this technology augments what we're doing, and somebody, I'm glad I just thought of this, because somebody in construction tech really enlightened me about these processes with an example which I've used and I think makes sense to most people. So consider the surgeon, right? What is the best use of a surgeon's time? It is being inside of you, fixing whatever is wrong, clipping, sewing, removing, adding, whatever. The more time that they spend doing tests and arguing before any surgery about ways to proceed, that is a massive waste of the best use of their time. So think about that with construction. If you show up at a job site at 8:00 with the construction team and everybody just goes around in a circle and argues about what's wrong and who's to blame, and next thing you know, it's lunch. What a colossal waste of time. But if you have, video capture technology that overnight has gotten an update on where everything is and identified problems with the quality of the construction and identified, where you're behind or ahead with the schedule, et cetera, or where you're behind or ahead with costs. Okay, at 8:00, everybody has all those facts. Okay, we know what the facts are. Let's do what we do best, which is solve problems, and let's get this done. So I think that's the way I see these technology solutions. There's not going to be one that, magically creates a workforce of, master electricians, but, you can do things that just, even if it's a half an hour of time that you're not wasting chasing something down, that's half an hour somebody has to do something else and be more efficient. So
it's our most valuable resource.
Yeah,
right?
It is.
And I think AI just makes that point even sharper in terms of, it's starting to eliminate a lot of the time wasted and now allowing people to spend a lot more time focused on highly productive activities. Right. And so why not spend more time, doing the things that you're great at and having AI cut the stuff out that's very difficult? And you don't even need AI in that place either, right? Like you talk about the Build It Permits app. And the simple, like, do you want to spend, an hour, 2.5 hours trying to dig through the city site, trying to find something about one project? Or do you want to spend 15 minutes, less than that, being able to click on an app and just seeing the information and moving on?
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. You have that free time to do what you do best. If it's business development, you have a BD buddy in AI technology, then that's more time than you can do what you really want to do, which is get out there and be extroverted and have coffee with people and knock on doors. Or if you're, an estimator or whatever it is you do, if you have more time to focus on what the best use of your time is. I'm kind of excited because I don't want to make the same mistake twice. I remember in the early 90s, so before you were even born, I assume, right?
Early 90s. I'm a 92.
Okay, so right about that time, I remember hearing about this information superhighway and, the World Wide Web. And I remember thinking this is ridiculous. Why would I go to my desktop, turn it on, wait for it to boot up, and then get on my dial-up, beep, 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 AOL.com, and type in, CBS.com so I can watch the news. I'm like, I got a TV. I turn it on. It's on. And I kind of got behind the curve, I guess, of that technology adoption. And man, Bitcoin, another thing. I remember hearing about Bitcoin in 2009 or something. And I'm like, oh man, I would love to mine one of these things. And I had my little desktop and I kind of figured out it was harder than it looked. But I just dropped it and I'm like, oh man, look at
where
we'd be having this conversation on my yacht in the Mediterranean if I had been smarter. So when I see when I hear AI in construction, I'm like, okay, be an early adopter because it's going to happen. Yeah. And so that's why I get excited about this stuff.
I was going to ask.
I don't want to miss the train again,
Well, that's the thing. I was going to ask, do you categorize yourself as an early adopter? And it sounds like yes, both in personal and professional.
No, I'm an early adopter because I've been burned twice, right? I was not an early adopter with the World Wide Web. And I kind of fell behind there. And then was not an early adopter of cryptocurrency and, missed that opportunity. So now I'm like, okay,
missed the second house.
I may be slow, but I'm not stupid, right? And if I get burned twice, I'm going to try and make sure it doesn't happen again. So that's why. And then I also think, I've been doing this job for 21 years and in trade associations, some things are kind of the same year in and year out. We have our golf tournament, we have our awards banquet, we have advocacy. All those things are really, really important, but just to kind of keep it fresh. That's why in living in Austin, where there is a focus on construction technology, I'm trying to wrap my head around more of what's happening.
And how do you see this being a shift that brings a younger face to construction? I think that's one of the things that I think we're all really worried about is adoption in a younger generation. And how do these two worlds converge?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I think technology really turns people on, younger people, because they're what are they called? Digital natives, right? They've always had an iPhone to play with. Mm-hmm. There are opportunities like drone specialists. The simple drone, that's another one. A drone, it's a toy, Merry Christmas, go take some pictures of trees or whatever. But then people realize I don't have to send somebody up to inspect the roof.
That could be a career.
Yeah, it is a career. And so I've engaged with a lot of young people. I had this kid, we were doing a video for our building and he did this amazing stuff. And he's 21 or something, just flying the drone down the road and taking good stuff. So yeah, things like that are happening. At the risk of dating myself, I'm going to say we need to make construction cool, right? I think that's kind of a dated term.
I still use this.
Okay.
Yeah, you're still, I might be dated too now. I don't know.
Yeah, but I'm do I need to say we need to make construction lit? But then you sound like an idiot because you're an old person. That is really something I'm really fascinated with, because if you work in the industry, you meet some fascinating individuals, whether they're in the office or out in the field. I did a podcast today with a guy who focuses on talking to people who are more in the office. And I told him, I said, you would be really well served to start a segment where you go and get the people who are in the field. They got the sleeve of tattoos and they got a huge personality, or maybe they don't, but they just are silent doers and they won't say a word, but they'll build a house in a day. These great people out there in the industry, and the more that we can shine a light on them and make construction cool, I think that will really help us. And technology certainly plays a part in that. I'm a big fan of HGTV, and granted, it's sort of like light design and whatnot, but it beams into people's homes 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Incredible imagery of people who are fun, successful, camera friendly, diverse men and women, and they are, bad, what's with construction. They can hang drywall, they can do electrical, carpentry, and that imagery is really, really important. And so how can we showcase what the opportunities are? Because most people who are not in construction, they might just see, oh my gosh, that guy's, digging a ditch and it's 100 degrees outside. That's not all there is to construction. There's so many different opportunities. So the more that technology is embedded in the industry, there are more opportunities for younger people to be the, what do they call them? Like the VDC video, or I forget what the titles are, but to be the person who leverages their talent to help the team that's building and to do it well.
And to call back to an earlier kind of comment that we made about how developers were some of the early people and specialty trades were some of the early people that forced the industry to adopt technology, this might be that. This labor shortage might be the way that we need to inspire the next generation to come through our doors.
And thinking about it now, getting back to your question about like what's going to force the hand of people, I've found it difficult for those leading firms to kind of fully open up and talk about all the little tricks that they've learned by investing in new technologies. Again, they may say like, oh, here's our drone or our robot dog or whatever. But I'm convinced that the secret sauce for successful firms is those technology innovations, and you're not going to reveal your secret sauce that makes you a little bit less expensive for the owner or a little bit faster on your schedule.
Yes.
And so I think there will be a learning curve where eventually those secret sauces will be learned and shared with the masses, and people will be like, oh my gosh, that's what we need to do. I think if you look back at the history of construction, there's always some new, we need to learn lean construction. We need to learn how to be LEED certified, all these different things that were early adopted. Like, oh, what are those people doing? We don't need to do that. We're just going to continue doing things. But all of a sudden, when you start losing business because you're being outrun,
totally.
I think that's the common thing. And then the culture is the other part, attracting and retaining good people. I love talking to people about how they onboard, because when it comes to the workforce, you always hear like, okay, we have money to train people and we have places to train people, and we'll talk to their parents and talk to the schools and we get these kids excited about construction. Okay, do that, but the next component is they have to have a good first experience. And if they go into a buzzsaw situation where they've been sold this great life and I'm going to do well in construction, and their first job is just, everybody's a jerk, porta potties are filthy, nobody cares to invest their time in helping this person. It's like, what am I doing here? I was sold this great path and I feel like I've been hoodwinked and they're never going to come back. The really smart companies really focus on onboarding. I talked to a guy this morning who stopped by the office, and I asked him, I said, how do you work with new people? And he said, yeah, we have interns come from the local high school kind of east of town.
Oh, fantastic.
And so they come through and we show them what we're doing. And he said, we have stocked ponds in the back. So like if you just like want to go before work or after work and fish, you can do that.
Amazing.
And it was, I have to say something, it's National Suicide and Construction Week, right? I know it's not technology focused, but it is part of the culture.
Super important.
And, he was saying, he's like, and I've talked to a lot of construction companies who are like, when something tragic like that happens, we let people know that, if there's something going on with you related to this situation or just in general, like we have a third party. I know a company here that went out and hired like an independent therapist, no connection to the company. It wasn't an internal EOP or whatever they call it. And he said, Phil, we have, hundreds of employees, but only like 2 people took advantage of that. And this person I talked to today, he said, we hired a preacher, like this guy who's just a folksy, good guy that people can relate to. And he said, he's worked with like 30 or so of our employees, like whatever they're going on, they just want to talk. And he said, in this industry where people are overworked and they're getting yelled at because they're behind schedule or their quality of work isn't good. And then they're always away from their family and their family's mad at them. And I think, they just get into a place and it's really, really hard and it's really, really dark. And so addressing culture in the industry is extremely important. And kind of flipping back to how that will change the industry and bring people in. I talked to another company. This is what I love about my job, by the way. I get to like kind of...
You're a connector.
I get little glimpses and I'm like, oh, that's how you do it. Thank you for sharing that, because they wouldn't share it with a competitor necessarily. But I asked this person, I said, you are really, really good about the diversity of your workforce. That's a big part of your company's identity. Are you just ticking a box, or like, tell me? I knew this person well enough that he could be straight up with me. He's like, Phil, we deal with a lot of private owners, and some people love the kind of militaristic, the show up and shut up, and we're going to get this done, troops. Some people like that kind of approach. He said, I have other people and they're softer, and it's like, you know what, I don't like this guy, do you have anybody else? And so he said, I have all these tools at my disposal to bring in different people on the different teams to make us successful with all of our different clients. And that was their strategy for success. And by all measures that I can see, it's really, really working. And having that diversity is really, really important. And, again, that's part of the culture.
Which, irregardless of whether or not that's part of tech, I mean, that's part of the future of construction. That's part of what we need to shift and change in order to allow for more people to enter the industry, is provide a culture that is open and welcome. Not that it's not. I mean, you talked about back in the day, joining the AGC at the global level or at the national level, and it being so open. Yeah. But how do you devise a culture that can be, suitable to a number of different personalities who are coming in, and help support them in different ways, because everyone needs support in a different way?
Yeah, I can just tell you something that we did, which I'm super proud of in this regard. And it's not a silver bullet solution, but it's just an example of how just tweaking something a little bit can make a big difference. When we were talking about diversity and more women in construction, and I think a lot of people get paralyzed, like, oh gosh, what do we need to do? Do we need like a policy? Do we need a person to, they're kind of like, we just want to build things.
We just need a safe space.
Well, so I got two great examples about women in construction. The first one is I was talking to a woman about our upcoming clay shoot, and we have a clay shoot coming up in 2 weeks, right? This was a few years ago, but it's always successful. It'll sell out 3 flights, 9, 11, and 2. People love it. You're going to love it when you come out. And by all measures, it's a success. And some people will be like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I was talking to this female executive, and she says to me, she's like, yeah, I'm not going to go to that clay shoot because I just didn't grow up shooting and I don't want to embarrass myself. I said, time out. Here we are talking about more women in construction and needed, and you are going to miss this incredible opportunity to engage with all these different trades and people. That's terrible. What can we do to fix this? So we came up with the idea of doing a clay sheet 101 just for women. And Tony in our office, who's female, she led it. She was very involved with the NAWIC, the National Association of Women in Construction. And they intentionally got a female instructor, so there would be no mansplaining, pull back. And I didn't go, but all the testimonials I've heard, they'll bring tears to your eyes. This one woman was like, I didn't want to ask my husband to teach me how to shoot because I know he'd get annoyed, but now I've learned, and so I have something in common with them. And he was like, oh my gosh. So now we do that routinely. We do it every year. But that was just something real little. And that woman who said she wasn't going to go to the clay shoot, she wound up going. And she had a great time. And she was hanging out, and I was so proud of that. So that's one example of just little things that you can do. Yeah. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but there's another really fascinating woman in town who is the lead person at a sizable construction company, big office here in Austin. They're based out of Dallas. She graduated from UT in the 1990s, and on a dare, she interviewed with the current construction company she works for. No. She was a psychology major, and they needed somebody to help in the plan room with the plotter, And she's like, yeah, I'll go interview with them. She interviewed with all these other companies. She came back and she was like, oh my gosh, the other companies were like, yeah, you'll work for us for a few years and you'll get married or, have a baby. But she said the construction company people you could just tell like they were just really holistically interested in her and supporting her and really wanted her. And she said, she's like, I had to take the job because I could sense something really positive there. And she said, yeah, I had challenges, but they always had my back. I mean, as somebody caused problems on a job site or whatever it was, I always knew that there was somebody higher up who would always look out for me. And, Chloe, that was 30 years ago. And she's the head of this. She's a great person. Might be a good person to interview at some point.
I would love to. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, like I said, a lot of the time adoption or stepping into a new space is just about creating a safe space for the people for them to be beginners, right?
Right.
Phil, this has been fantastic.
Oh, I hope so.
Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. We've had such a fantastic relationship from the moment I met you. And so to be able to do this together has been really meaningful. And thank you for sharing a lot of your stories too. I think that it's going to really resonate with the audience that we have here.
I hope so. Yeah.
Before we wrap up, if people want to follow along with you on LinkedIn, or if they want to follow the AGC or become members, how can they do so?
Yeah, I'm always on LinkedIn. I love it. I never set out to have a lot of followers, but people were interested in talking to me. So I'm like, okay, if you want to be subjected to my LinkedIn feed, so be it. But yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. That's the easiest place to get a hold of me. We're on the web at agcaustin.org. That's our website. Our social media presence on LinkedIn and Facebook are pretty constant. And I always say that we are a great community of commercial builders down here. So if you want to be part of the community, join us. You'll enjoy it. You've recently popped into the community. I think you've really enjoyed it. And
I can attest.
Yeah, it's a good place to be. So
thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.